Come on back, here we go. Good stuff. So when Steve introduced me, he told you that I work for the University of Kentucky. I'm a school leadership professor. We prepare principals and superintendents. I also run the center that I founded, the nation's only center in the country that focuses on the leadership side of school technology. It's called CASTLE. We do lots of work all around the world. But what he didn't tell you is that I still live in Iowa. I live in Ames, Iowa, and I'm actually UK's first remote professor. It wasn't the right time for me to move my family down to Lexington. So we stayed in Iowa, and I go down there about once a month to kind of check in and do some stuff. Make sure they remember that I work for them and vice versa. And these sort of telecommuting arrangements are becoming very common. It's estimated now that at least 20% of the American workforce telecommutes at least one day a week, which means that they're working at home, in coffee shops, on the road, whatever. You know, we have the technologies now, of course, to do that. So, you know, for those of us who are relatively new to this information landscape, which is all of us, but for those of us in particular who aren't active participants in this information landscape, it's very important for us as leaders to try and understand the characteristics of this new information landscape, this new economic landscape, this new learning landscape that we're now in. Because if you're going to adequately prepare your students, right, for the world as it is and as it will be, you have to sort of understand how the world as it is and will be works. And so there's actually some pretty essential characteristics of this new landscape that are quite different from our old, more local analog landscapes. And one of those characteristics is this idea that the world is now much more global rather than local. And that idea of global versus local manifests itself in a number of different ways. For example, the telecommuting professor, right? Or this idea that many of you, most of you, are actually living in that global versus local idea every day because you think about who you communicate with electronically, right? You're texting and you're Facebooking and you're sending emails and so on to people, not just in your local area, but people around the state, people around the country, people around the world. You're interacting with people, you know, globally yourselves on a regular basis. Some of you maybe, you know, Skype your grandkids or have video conferences with, you know, employees that you're thinking about hiring and so on. These are all manifestations of that global versus local. And we have lots of ways that that's playing out. So Google Maps is a great way to think about global versus local. Many of you have played around with Street View, where you take the little orange dude and you drag him down to the street and you can see what it looks like, right? So for example, we could take a walk along Inner Harbor in Baltimore, Maryland, here from Atlanta. We don't have to actually drive up to Baltimore. And we could literally walk down the street and see what it looks like. Now, it's not live yet, but you can at least get a pretty good sense of what it looks like. You could do a virtual tour of San Francisco or Rome or Tokyo or whatever you wanted, right? And global versus local plays out in other interesting ways. Here's one of my favorites. This is the Google Art Project. So same idea, just instead of walking down the street, you're able to walk down the halls of the world's major art museums. You literally can walk down the halls of the Hermitage and turn and look at the paintings and see the cards on the wall. You know, you can go to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam and you can check out the bedroom. And if you really want, because Google scanned these at such high resolution, you can get really up close and personal with the art. And when I say up close and personal, I mean really up close and personal with the art, right? I mean, if you're into art and art history and so on, this is, you know, an amazing resource for you and your art history teachers. This is how global versus local starts to play out. But the challenge for us is not just to recognize how global and local is playing out for the rest of the world, but how do we start establishing congruence between the information landscape outside of our schools and the information landscape inside of our schools. In other words, how do we make this idea of global versus local start happening in our buildings, in our classes, with our kids, right? So just to show you a couple quick examples, here's Kathy Cassidy. She teaches 6-year-olds up in Canada. We'll probably revisit her later. But you know, here she is. They're doing cooperative story writing with a 4th grade class in Pennsylvania. A few miles separate those two classrooms, and yet they're able to trade ideas back and forth and collaboratively write a story together, and there it is. There's the evidence on her class blog. Oh, by the way, did I mention she teaches 6-year-olds in Canada? That doesn't stop them from interacting with, you know, classrooms in Serbia. That doesn't stop them from interacting with classrooms in Greece. These kids at age 6 are starting to internalize what it means to be globally connected, right? They have no idea in their mind that, you know, connecting with a classroom somewhere else, overseas, is a big deal. They're like, well, yeah, sure, of course we connected with Greece. Of course we connected with Serbia. Pfft, big deal. We're 6, right? Right? And this idea that we can start coming together in ways that are interesting and pedagogically powerful are happening all over the place. Here's part of the Flat Classroom Project website. And the idea behind the Flat Classroom was started by 2 teachers, a middle school teacher in Georgia and a middle school teacher who was teaching overseas. I think she was in Shanghai at the time. That's where Julie was. And so Vicki Davis here in Georgia and Julie Lindsay over in Shanghai. And what they did is they started collaborating together, and the Flat Classroom Project has grown now. So they have dozens of classrooms all around the world interacting on various projects. They have like an racism project, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's about dealing with racism and so on. It's about next generation education. What does it mean to be a digital teen? They're coming together, they're collaborating, they're working together. These classrooms are doing some really interesting global interaction stuff, right? And so, when I say I visit classroom teachers and I visit schools and I say, does your classroom have a computer? Does it have an internet connection? Does it have a webcam? You're good to go. That's all you need, right? Any classroom that's got a webcam connected to the computer, there's no reason whatsoever that classroom should not be connected to some other classroom somewhere else in the world. It's easy to do, right? On our website, I've given you a whole list places you can go that broker connections, right? I'm a 4th grade classroom in Kentucky, and I want to connect with a 4th grade classroom in China. There are places that broker those connections. And also on that spreadsheet are a whole list of places people who have done this and have tips for you about how to make that work better and things you need to think about when you're starting global collaboration projects and all that. These school connection and collaboration resources are there for the picking. DangerouslyIrrelevant.org, click on workshops, click on SAIS. The link is there under the heading Global. Got it? So you should be able to find it pretty easily. There it is. And there's no reason every single one of your classes shouldn't be connected to the web. You had a fantastic session yesterday that talked about globally oriented education and teaching and learning. I hope any of you got a chance to go to that. The possibilities here for cross-cultural understandings and for cross-cultural interactions are astounding. Turn to your neighbor. In the next couple minutes, talk about how well are you doing at making your classrooms more global, not just local. Go. All right, come on back. Here we go. Are we having fun yet? All right, so we're talking about congruence. Congruence between our information and learning landscapes inside our buildings and our information and learning landscapes outside of our buildings, right? And one of the key characteristics of our outside information landscape is that it is much, much more global than just local, right? And yet, for most of you, I venture that your discussions focus on the fact that for the most part, your classrooms are still very much locally oriented rather than globally oriented, with some exceptions. Right? Here's another characteristic of our new information landscape. It goes back to that third big idea, this idea that, well, the second and third big idea, this idea that we can find each other and that we can work together, right? So we have a rise of this new phenomenon called crowdsourcing. And crowdsourcing is sort of an interesting concept. It's this idea that we can pull a bunch of people together and they can each make maybe very small contributions, but together it adds up to something big. So Amazon actually is a prime example of this. How many of you have gone to Amazon and used their product ratings or reviews to help you buy something? Most of you. How many of you actually contributed a rating or review? See, the rest of you are moochers. Right? But the idea here is that anybody can leave a review of a book, and it doesn't even have to be very long, but you click on a star, you leave a few sentences about the book, and together the aggregation of all of those provides tremendous value for us, right? Because now you're not hearing from just 1 or 2 people about whether or not that book or that technology or that gardening tool that you want to buy is any good. You're hearing from dozens of people, hundreds of people, tens of thousands of people sometime, right? And if you've got 3,000 people that have rated and reviewed a book and the average rating is 4.5, guess what? You're probably going to like it. Right, but if you're not certain, you can dig down and look at all the reviews and say, here's what the people with 1 star said, or 2 stars, and here's what their criticism, right? And you can, it makes it really easy to buy a digital camera these days, because you have lots of information that you otherwise would never have from the person who's trying to sell you the camera. And this sort of crowdsourcing platforms where we can create places where people come in and rate and review and so on are playing out in a number of different realms. So Amazon, we've got places like TripAdvisor. So, I'm going to some new city and I want to know whether or not, what hotel I should stay in, what restaurant I should eat at, what things I should do and see. TripAdvisor does a good job of that. We have places like Rotten Tomatoes, what movie should I rent on Friday night, and so on. So those places are there. But these crowdsourcing platforms have actually live on other different spaces too. Places where we create platforms where people can come together and do interesting things, right? So we have places like Craigslist, right? And the motivation behind Craigslist was actually pretty innocent. Hey, let's just provide sort of a community bulletin board where people can put their classified ads up there for free. And it sort of had the unintended effect of killing the newspaper industry, but that's a whole other story, right? But it was just a platform for people to come together, share, contribute, connect, and so on. It works great. We've got eBay, right, which is sort of a platform for democratization of commerce. Now everybody can be a seller and can reach people at scale. Now your garage sale junk isn't just limited to your neighborhood or your small town. Now it's, you can sell your junk to everybody in the whole world. And, if you just absolutely are into doilies, right, eBay is your place. Because you can sell your doilies, you can find new doilies, it's all there. Right, eBay is a wonderful, wonderful place. Similarly, we have places like Etsy. Etsy is sort of the eBay of crafting, right? So you do woodworking, you make jewelry, you knit or crochet or do cross-stitch. Maybe you make vinyl iPad decal stickers, whatever your thing is, it creates a place for you to market your wares and have other people find your crafts and so on, right? Other platforms for connection and collaboration. We have places like Vacation Rental by Owner. Hey, I'm traveling overseas and I want to pay some fancy hotel place. Could I rent your place for a week? Or, hey, you want to come stay in my place for a week? I'll move out if you pay enough. Right? That's the idea. So it's sort of a brokerage service, a platform for connecting, kind of like Craigslist. It's like Craigslist for vacation rentals, right? Similarly, we have Airbnb. Now, this will probably make most of you nervous, but the idea behind Airbnb is that hotels are expensive, particularly in high-rent cities like Washington, D.C., right? The average hotel room in downtown D.C. probably goes for $250, $300 a night, minimum. And the idea behind Airbnb is that people have unused space in their houses. Hey, I got a loft you could stay in for a night. Hey, I got a spare bedroom. It's even got a kitchenette. Hey, I got a couch you could surf, for the next couple of nights if that's the place you needed. And Airbnb is the brokerage platform for that. And it sounds nuts, right? Most of you would never be like, hey, can I stay on your couch? I'll pay you $50. Right? But it's exploding. It's exploding. This service is. Airbnb is growing exponentially. We have Pickup Pal. Pickup Pal is a crowdsourcing platform for ride sharing. Hey, I'm driving to Atlanta. I'm driving in, from the suburbs into downtown Atlanta, and I got a couple extra seats in my car. Who wants to carpool with me? Or, hey, I'm driving to Sheboygan, and I got an empty seat. Anybody want to ride? Or, hey, I need a ride to Sheboygan. Is anybody going that way? Right, that's what Pickup Pal does. It's a ride-sharing platform. It's not a hitchhiking platform. There's a difference. See-Click-Fix is a crowdsourcing platform for repairs and taking care of your community. So it gives you a chance to go log in and say, hey, the water main on our street is busted. Or, hey, there's this pothole out in front of my house. It's been there for 3 weeks. Could somebody please come fix it? Right, and it's a chance for all of us to be city inspectors and community monitors and help our local governments take care of our communities. It's the idea behind See-Click-Fix. This is Ushahidi. It's another crowdsourced platform. It's based around mobile phones. It was originally invented in Kenya. So you can imagine the technological capability in Kenya is not particularly robust, but they actually turn out that they have a lot of mobile phones there. And so the idea was they were having an election. They were concerned about election fraud, so they created Ushahidi, which allowed somebody to text Ushahidi from their phone and they could text a note, and it would be attached to their geographic location. So they could say, hey, something fishy is going on at our polling place, and they could describe it, right? And it would then show up on a map, your message would show up on a map, and you could tell where the trouble spots were with the election in terms of election monitoring. That same technology has now been used to monitor crime in Atlanta, to help flood victims in Pakistan, and so on. The idea is that when you create platforms where people can contribute, even in just small ways, together we create tremendous aggregate value. This is the Huffington Post. How many of you know about the Huffington Post? A few? Oh, good, that's better. All right. And the Huffington Post on its surface looks like this major media site, right? It's got a big corporation behind it, and it looks like something from a newspaper or a television. They got politics and business news and sports news and entertainment and just all those things that we expect. But at its heart, Huffington Post is a giant group blog. And they have experts participating in the space. They have people like Paula Allen Meares, vice president of the University of Illinois. But sitting side by side with her is Brandy Williams, educator, mom, and wife. We've got Dean Shareski, reckless learner, whatever that is, right? I mean, this is what the Huffington Post is. But the crazy thing about the Huffington Post is that this huge, giant blog actually is upending the media business. So if I had come to you 15 years ago and said something like this, hey, Peter and Eddie, I got this great idea. Here's my idea. Ready? I'm going to create this platform online where people can write, and I'm just going to invite thousands and thousands of people to go write there. No, I'm not going to tell them what to write about. No, I'm not even going to tell them when to write. I'm just going to say, hey, write when you feel like it, on whatever you feel like. But when they do submit something, I'll put a category in it. I'll call it politics or sports or entertainment or whatever, right? And no, they don't have to be an expert. They could just be like, some mom somewhere. And no, we're not going to pay them anything. It's going to be huge. You looked at me like I was nuts, right? And yet, the Huffington Post now outdraws, by a factor of 2, ABC News and CBSNews.com combined. This is the power of crowdsourcing that we're just now starting to wrap our head around. Right? And this is at a time when most people aren't even participating in playing. What happens when this stuff becomes commonplace, when we actually start to recognize what our power is? Then what's going to happen? We're crowdsourcing in all kinds of areas. Patients Like Me is a website that started out as a community support group for people that had different diseases and disorders and medical issues, right? So you could log in, and maybe you were suffering from breast cancer, and you connect with other people around the country who had breast cancer too, and you could dialogue about what kind of medicine you were taking, the treatments your doctor was giving you, and your symptoms, and so on. It was a support network, right? But then they also started to realize there was a great place for medical research for certain sort of diseases or disorders. So imagine that you had Crohn's disease, which is relatively rare. Maybe you're the only person in a 200-mile radius that has Crohn's disease. And now all of a sudden, it's very hard for a doctor to get together in a treatment pool to try some new drug. But now the doctors can go to Patients Like Me and find the Crohn's disease discussion group and say, hey, we need 50 people for this drug trial. We're going to put 25 of you in the control, 25 of you in the treatment. You won't know which. It's going to be a double blind. We're going to report all the results and so on, and it works great because everybody benefits. The community, of course, has interest in having that problem solved. The doctors do too. It works both ways. We're crowdsourcing medical research. Here's another example of crowdsourcing medical research. So these scientists that were working on HIV and AIDS have been struggling with this protein folding, unfolding problem for like a decade, and they just couldn't figure out. And somebody had the bright idea of turning it into a game, like a puzzle. Right? Let's turn it into a puzzle and throw it out to the gaming community, and this problem that stumped the scientists for a decade was solved in 3 weeks. We're crowdsourcing charity and microlending and helping the developing world through websites like Kiva, right? So you can invest in Juanito. Bolivia, you can put in your $25. 20 of us do that. He gets his $500 microloan. The payment rate on Kiva is better than a traditional bank loan. And then you can reinvest that money in somebody else like Under Bahar, who's working on his transportation in Mongolia and whatever. But we all have the ability to be lenders now in the greater space. Innocentive is a place where we're crowdsourcing innovation and invention. So companies have problems that they're trying to solve. They throw them out on Innocentive with a price tag, right? If you can help us solve this problem, how do you print on these? Right? If you can help us solve that problem, the price tag there is $20,000, right? If you come up with a solution, and you can see that so far 159 solvers, people like you and me, have registered to try and come up with a solution for that problem, right? Maybe you figured out how to keep caribou and moose and deer and bear from going through some place that you don't want them to, and the award there from the government, whoever, is $10,000. You got 167 people trying to solve that. Maybe you're trying to create containers that keep beverages longer, keep beverages colder longer, and again, we've got 600 plus solvers for that $10,000 prize. We're crowdsourcing innovation. The classic story of incentive is the oil spill up in Alaska, where they were really having trouble clearing it up because oil in cold environments is thick and sludgy, and they were having trouble working with it because it didn't flow nicely. And the guy who solved the problem was a cement guy from the Midwest. Because I know how to work with thick and sludgy in the cold, right? And he got a big prize, and we got a cleaner environment, and so on. Kickstarter is a place where we crowdsource venture capital, right? So you can go on Kickstarter and say, I got this brilliant idea. I need my smartphone to be a robot, right? And you take that pitch to the bank, and they say, we are not funding that stupid idea, right? You got to be ridiculous. But you can throw it out on Kickstarter, and you say, I got a smartphone, and I need it to be a robot. Will you support this, please? And if you contribute enough money, you can have one too. And look, with 19 days to go, they only needed $32,000. They've already raised $72,000. They're going to recognize their dream of a smartphone robot, and they have 735 people who are with them. Sweet. And we can talk big money here for some instances, right? So here's the Pebble e-paper watch. They were looking for $100,000 to create this watch that interacts with your phone, and instead they got almost 69,000 backers, and they raised $10 million. We're crowdsourcing venture capital for ideas that a bank or a traditional firm might sneer at. This is fan fiction. How many of you know about fan fiction? Fan fiction is a place where people who, only a couple of you, people who really care about books or TV shows or movies can go in and they write stories about their characters. They write stories about those universes, right? So you can see that here's fan fiction. There's 309 stories set in the Friday the 13th universe. There's 3 stories set in the 2001 Space Odyssey universe. You get the idea. And so people care so much about their characters that they just feel compelled to write stories about them, in those environments from the books or TV shows and movies. And the classic example is Harry Potter. So 7 books and 8 movies later, there apparently are still like 450,000 stories to be told about the Harry Potter universe. And you'll see that these stories that get submitted are 100,000 words, 60,000 words. These are huge, long book-length stories. And people are actively soliciting feedback. Hey, make my story better. Help me improve it. Did I get the characters right? I was thinking about this twist on book 4. And they get it out there. And, you can see that they got reviewers. 125 people reviewed a 108,000-word story. And the thing that fascinates me about fan fiction is that the same kids you can't bribe to write in school, many of them are going home and writing tens of thousands of words a month in places like fan fiction. And you don't even know the site exists. And then, of course, the classic example of crowdsourcing is a place like Wikipedia, right? Where we've come together and we've created the world's largest encyclopedia, which at its core is just as accurate as the Britannica and has stuff in there that would never, ever be in a printed encyclopedia, like all the episodes of Gilligan's Island. It's all good stuff, right? So this idea around crowdsourcing, and I've talked a long time about crowdsourcing, but notice that aggregation of small inputs together can have tremendous value and create platforms for people to come together and work together and do interesting work. And you don't have to be an expert. You can be an amateur and play in these spaces, right? And make contributions and add value to our global information commons. What the heck is the global information commons? The global information commons is the web. It's this new information space that we all have access to and that we all can contribute to. Right? And this new global information commons that we all share, that we all should be shepherding and taking responsibility for, is a fascinating, fascinating place. So we have adult educators, for example, that are contributing to the information commons. They're teachers and administrators and guidance counselors and folks like that who are making spaces and then using it as a crowdsourcing platform to make value. So for example, this is the VoiceThread for Education Wiki. And a wiki is just an editable website where you can easily get content up there. So VoiceThread is a tool that allows you to throw pictures up and then add voice narration to it. And then what this teacher did was that by Colette Casanelli, and she's a sweet lady, I met her, is that she created a place where you could post your VoiceThread projects that you did with your class. So you could go to the 912 section, for example. You could say, how are other secondary classroom teachers using VoiceThread. And then you can see that there's all kinds of examples up here of how they've done that, right? So here's Jeff Utech. He's sharing, biology VoiceThreads where they're doing science projects and they're writing up their science experiments using VoiceThread instead of a traditional written format and so on. But it's a crowdsourced platform where educators can come together and share their work with each other and share what their kids are doing with each other, and there's lots of value there. I put out the call on my website and said, there's all these education apps that are floating around, and it's really hard to sort through them all because there's tens of thousands of them. How do we make sense of which apps are good for kids and which apps aren't, and which ones are good for my subject area and so on? And my readers of my blog, we crowdsourced a list of sites that review and share education apps, right? So now what we did is we identified a short list of places that help review those education apps so that we can help make sense of them. Instead of having to figure it out on our own, we can go to these websites and they'll help us make sense of the education app ecosphere. And that list that you're looking at right now was crowdsourced, right, where a bunch of us came together and we each added a link or two until we have a site that's useful to everybody. We've all made contributions to the global information commons. And students can do the same thing, right? So here's a middle school science wiki. It's called Science Alive. And you can see that they're researching different projects down on the left. So you could pick one like global warming. And when that pops up, you can see that we've got 2 students working in the wiki. One of them is talking about why humans are not the cause of global warming. And then here's all their research. And they've got some basic facts and some links and some charts and diagrams and cartoons and videos. And then right below, here's Brady. He's got the counterpart, why we are the cause of global warming. And he's opposing the other side. And he, again, is also presenting diagrams and charts and links and videos and so on. Here's the Shanghai American School. Here's their Asian History Wiki. This is a grade 9 project where they're literally writing their own Asian history textbook from scratch. So you could click on Korean history, for example, and you can see that they're starting to blow this out. Apparently they're not blowing that out. Let's go back to Chinese dynasties. So there we go. But you can see that they're starting to blow this out and make this thing, right, where the students are literally creating a resource that not only solidifies their own learning, but also teaches others. So we have lots of ways where adult educators and the students that we serve can create things collaboratively. We can all be crowdsourced amateurs and professionals working together to make things that are beneficial to others, right? Whew, that was a long run. Turn to your neighbor and talk for a minute about how well are you all doing at taking advantage of this crowdsourcing capability within your school? What could your teachers do together that would have value in the global space? What could your kids do that they can make things together that would then have value for others? Talk about that for 3 minutes. How well are you doing in this crowdsourcing space?